editor of MEON publication dedicated to the revival of Irish intellectual life. We run a website, podcasts, and we had our first event with a number of organisations some of you would be familiar with. Recently enough, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, so my memory's gone. I only had one drink, maybe I should have had two. So my speech will touch on several motifs, the intersection of Irish and Flemish history, the fate of Ireland's aristocratic stratum following the decline of the Gaelic social order, and the structures that permitted the continuity of Irish identity across borders in an early modern context, that's quite a mouthful, in which logistics posed a greater obstacle than they do today. On reflection, because I only finished this 2-3 hours ago, what this talk is really about is the salvation of the Irish nation in the 17th century. Something I care about, something you care about, I hope, and the rest of you should care about if you're Irish, and Irish people are great. Each of the foregoing themes is worthy of speech in and of itself, but given the limited time I've been allotted, I've decided to centre my speech upon the relation of the Irish diaspora to Leuven as the knot that binds. But before I begin, some contextualisation is necessary. And the contextualisation will relate to what transpired to lead to the Irish elites, whether clerical or chieftains, leaving Ireland for the continent. So though Ireland had been partly occupied since the 12th century, England had failed to establish comprehensive control of the island until the early modern period. Ireland, unlike England under the rule of, say, Alfred the Great, who was a great centraliser, and the Normans built atop that, did not have a king or a monarch, same thing, that could project power across the island. Imagine a number of states, micro-states, all of which were kind of fairly anarchic, not exactly libertarian, but that sort of vibe. The result being a historical trajectory that gestated along similar lines to both Britain and the rest of Europe. The late Raymond Crotty, who was insistent upon our unique historical development as a nation. We didn't have feudalism, unlike the rest of you. So outside of the British-controlled Pale, a locus encompassing Dublin, as well as some of its adjacent counties, the Anglo-Irish earldoms were loyal to varying degrees. Anxiety on the Crown's behalf regarding this, these people should be their subjects, was underlaid with the Statutes of Kilkenny. Restricted Anglo-Irish imitation of Irish cultural practice. Essentially, they thought Irish culture was better than English culture. I have no opinion on that. The rebellions carried out by figures such as Silken Thomas and the half-Norman Patrick of Sarsfield were a further cause for concern, as was the loyalty to Catholicism amongst not only many Norman families and importance outside the Pale, but also, at least initially, the common people of the Pale, as evinced by the inefficacy of the Protestant prelate George Brown, I believe sometime in the 16th century, to convert the local populace. So moving on to the 16th century, next slide please. The Tudor conquest changed all this, very bad thing. It was sparked by the Geraldine Rebellion. King Henry VIII, who I presume you've all heard of, initiated a surrender and regrant policy, and it anticipated legally what would be accomplished by way of military arms, demographic replacement, and duplicity later on. It would be exhaustive to explicate the events that led to this impoverishment, destitution, and deterritorialization of the Gaelic populace in detail. Suffice to say, the defeat of the side the Gaels either led in certain instances or allied to in the 9 Years' War. All this takes place in the 17th century, by the way. In the 9 Years' War, the Irish Confederate Wars, and the Williamite War sealed the fate of the Gaelic order in Ireland. The tumults of the 16th and 17th centuries destroyed the hither existing identities and relations. There was a transformation of identity underway. It also ushered forth new ones. The reverberations of the Reformation acted as a wild card in terms of one's identity. Previously, one was either a Gael or a Norman. The Normans came in the 12th century, as I said. What happened with the Tudors onward was the settlement of English and Scottish settlers. And these are primarily of established High Church Anglican belief, or they were dissenter Protestants, Presbyterians, etc. This engendered tension with the largely and previously loyal, generally, Catholic Norman populace. The quasi-assimilation of many leading Norman families into Gaelic culture, as well as their convergence as allies with the Gaelic Irish during the Confederate and Williamite Wars, assisted in forging a new Irish nation on the basis of shared Catholic belief. Considered retrospectively, the attempt to reconcile the Gael and the Norman via the mortar of the Catholic faith in a book such as Forsa Fassa Éireann, or Foundations of Knowledge in Ireland by Geoffrey Keating, a very significant author if you want to understand Irish identity, signifies a watershed shift in Ireland's identity away from the previously prevailing antipodes, which I mentioned, Norman and Gael. National and religious identity is inseparable from the history of Irish pedagogy. The instrumental role of the Irish colleges on the continent serves as a testament to this. Emerging in 1592 due to concerns regarding the then nascent Trinity College Dublin, a hallmark of the Protestant ascendancy, which was established earlier that year. The first Irish college was chartered in Salamanca. By 1611, there were 12 Irish colleges in France, the Low Countries, and Spain, indicative of the exodus of Ireland's elites, as well as long-standing anxieties regarding religious persecution of Catholics. Leuven possesses a remarkable history as an intellectual centre point, being home to the largest and oldest Catholic university in the Low Countries. The University of Leuven may also boast of the Collegium Trilingue. I think that may still be around today, I'm not sure. I've only been to Leuven once, which was influenced, I believe, by Erasmus, an institution which nurtured humanism via the instruction of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. As well as this, the renowned Leuven-based printer, Dirk Martens published over 50 books by Erasmus and the first edition of Thomas More's Utopia. A new facet of Leuven's contribution to learning emerged in 1607 in the form of St. Anthony's College in Leuven. Its progenitor was Father Florence Conry, a priest whose patriotic credentials are beyond reproach. Cutting his teeth as a seminarian in the Irish College in Salamanca, he acted in capacity as a preacher and confessor under Hugh O'Neill and Red Hugh O'Donnell throughout the 9 Years' War. At the latter's deathbed, Father Conroy was his confessor. Following the loss of 5 Franciscan houses during the 9 Years' War, Philip III of Spain felt that it was imperative that a replacement be engendered, and thus conferred a perpetual subsidy of 1,000 ducats per annum for a new Irish college in Leuven. Following the flight of the Earls in 1607, he accompanied them on their journey, initially basing themselves in Spanish Netherlands. They spent time in Leuven, later departing to their destination of Rome. Conry's proximity to the exiled apex of the Gaelic social order marked him as a subversive in the eyes of the British. For instance, the so-called Baron of Howth, Christopher St. Lawrence, accused Conry of conspiring to lead an insurrection against Dublin Castle, the stronghold of Protestant power in Ireland. This may or may not have been alarmism on the aforesaid's part, for Conry, undoubtedly under scholarly auspices, translated Francis Maguire's observations concerning the state of Virginia, thereby giving the Catholic world an insight into early British settlements in the New World. Whether that's intelligence gathering or scholarship, I'll leave up to the audience. Conry's writings evinced the shift in Irish identity that was underway. He translated it into Irish catechism courtesy of the Castilian Jesuit Hieronimo de Rapalda, and added a gloss in which he used the word Erenach for Irish rather than Gael. And as I said, the Gael was the Gaelic populace. The latter of which was more encompassing, as both Gaels and Normans alike fell within its remit. Perhaps the most important and renowned individual associated with St. Anthony's is A. MacAngel, which literally means the angel. He did not self-denominate that himself, it was his students. Like Father Conry, he spent the time at the Irish College in Salamanca, wherein he obtained a doctorate in divinity. Thereafter, he assumed the role of supervisor and lecturer at the Irish College in Leuven. He employed as a position to foster the next generation of Irish Franciscan scholars, including John Coughlin, Patrick Fleming, Hugh Ward, and Anthony Hickey. Like many of his peers, MacAngel dedicated himself to defending Ireland's contribution to Christian civilization. Against Dominican critiques, he proffered a defense of Duns Scotus' theology in Apologia pro Johann Duns Scotus. Therein he also affirmed that Scotus was an Irishman. He was the recipient of papal, a lot of ethno-narcissism here, that he was the recipient of papal favour, maybe evinced by the Pope appointing him as the Archbishop of Armagh, and thereby the Primate of all Ireland. He was elected Definitor General with Friars Minor of the strict observance, conferring him authority on the Franciscans who followed the strict observance path. Using this position of influence, he assisted in founding further Irish colleges, both of which were in Rome, Sans Insidor and the Pontifical Irish College. My parents were actually married at one of those, I can't remember which one. Possessing a breadth of knowledge that far exceeds what passes for contemporary academics, MacAngel was chosen to tutor the sons of the aforesaid Hugh O'Neill. On O'Neill's behalf, he interceded with the British court, his object being the accrual of permission from the Crown for O'Neill to return to Ireland. As well as being a hub for Irish intellectual life in the continent, Leuven was home to the first, and in the 17th century at least, most prolific printing press in Ireland. This technology was ably employed by the Irish Franciscans to disseminate Irish texts. A preference for Irish over Latin, reminiscent of Dante opting for the Florentine vernacular over the language of liturgy, may be witnessed in MacAngel's The Mirror of the Sacrament of Penance. Written in Irish, the title was translated into Latin merely for indexing purposes. A further Irish printing press was established in Prague's Irish College, and there's an interesting story there where some Irish monks defended it during the 30 Years' War, but I can't remember all the details. Any elaboration on the significance of the Irish College would be remiss if it did not mention the Annals of the Four Masters. Some people here might be familiar with that. Over 400,000 words long, the Annals were composed under the direction of the Leuven Franciscans. They recount the history of Ireland from the Great Flood to the death of Hugh O'Neill, drawing on a number of sources, including the Book of Invasions or Laur Gabála Éireann. At the fore of the project was Michael O'Clery, a lay Franciscan brother based in Leuven. The text, like Geoffrey Keating's, portrays the Normans in a positive light on account of their adherence to the faith. As I said, this was a reconciliation of identity. This is cardinal, and thereby contributed to the refashioning of Irish identity. Historical consciousness is integral to a people's identity, as is their language. And in the four Annals of Four Masters, language and history achieve perfect parity. It constitutes the crown jewel of the Franciscan project to save the Irish nation and its Gaelic inheritance. The dream of many Franciscans came through in 1641, when Owen Roe O'Neill set sail for Ireland atop the St. Francis. The ship was crowned by the Irish Green Harp, the first to use, I believe, and was funded by the Irish Franciscans in Leuven. One of the leaders of the Irish Confederates in the 1640s, O'Neill's Tercio Regiment, which was established by the Spanish, defended Leuven successfully against a Franco-Dutch army. His wife is buried, by the way, on the grounds of the Irish College. Sir Ralph Winwood, and this is emblematic of British opinion on the Irish College, they were quite angry about it, which is funny, writing in 1614, complained about the activities of Irish Franciscans in Leuven. Their anti-English and anti-Protestant publications were smuggled back into Ireland, and English pressure eventually led to the city suppressing the printing press. I kind of want to quote this verbatim because it's really funny. The king himself plainly and effectually let him know the unworthy proceedings of the Irish friars at Leuven in printing and publishing those seditious libels, all of which were true, that's my own language, and that in their own language, which could aim at no other end but open rebellion. In conclusion, the Irish Franciscans played a vital role at the end and nadir of Gaelic Ireland, conserving its inheritance. But destruction also leads to creation, and they assisted in ushering forth a new conception of Irishness, spreading awareness of Irish identity on the continent, as well as Ireland's contribution to Christian civilization. What was perhaps Ireland's most despondent era may be considered in a different light due to the actions and efforts of these brave men. There's no other fitting way to end this talk than by quoting its motto, "For the glory of God and the honour of Ireland." Thank you.